or other publishing. Wade Franson is the host of Created in the Image of God, a series that examines the role of religion in society, from messianic returns to the emotive responses transmitted through our culture. Wade fearlessly addresses reality claims from all directions, objectively exploring their compatibility with Holy Scripture. Joining him is Daniel Sanderson, CEO of Planksip, an international philosophy and cultural media outlet, helping emerging thought leaders with personal branding by co-creating organic content. Tonight's episode, Road Journeys, with A.K. Frailey.
And I want to welcome you to the show.
Thank you.
And I'm going to get you to do something really interesting. I embrace somewhat happens in my head. It just pops into my head. And then I think I'm going to introduce Anne in a really unique and novel way. So here's how I want to introduce Anne to the audience is that I want you to, when I say now, I want you to turn around, look at that bookshelf behind you and think for about 3 seconds. Now you already might in your mind's eye have some sort of a roadmap of what's behind you, but I want you to actually embrace the 3 seconds, turn around, look at, when I say now, I want you to turn around, look at that bookshelf, and then start to arrange how you would describe what is on that bookshelf. Maybe there are things that are important to you. Maybe there are books that have helped you on your pathway, on your journey. My only caveat is if you're going to give any kind of a story, anecdote, or words of wisdom, please keep it relevant to the early stages of your life. One of the things that I do in this part of the show is explore those early years, those formative years, those years that have defined you, confined you, and embraced you, right? Okay, so here comes the word. Now go ahead, turn around, look at that bookshelf, and become familiar with the good friends that have.
Yeah, I put them up there. So
Yeah?
I know them pretty well.
You know them pretty well.
Yeah,
Okay,
I
okay.
know them pretty well.
Is there one book is there a certain section of books or one book that you think of in like younger versions of Anne?
Well, it's an interesting, because when you said that, a vision popped in my head, because when I was very young, my father moved out. My father was a professor, and so he had a lot to do. He was a medievalist, and he had books everywhere. And when he left, in my room, there was a shelf of books. And on the back, I was just little, and I remember staring at all these little penguins, because there were penguin books. And I remember thinking, someday these penguins are going to mean something to me, but it was one of the last touchstones of having my dad physically present in the house was these books. And the back, the spines, I couldn't read them. I mean, they were historical, tiny print. They weren't for me, but the little pictures of the penguins, and that has always stuck with me. And so if I look behind me, the books that are in the shelf, the dark books, those are my books, the books I've written.
You, yeah.
So those are mine, and those are the ones on this side are the first versions, the ones that I ended up going, I got to do this over again. And the ones on this side, these are all classics. A library recently closed, and the librarian said, go in there, get whatever you want, just be full, because we're going to people are getting rid of books all over the place. And I was thrilled, because I've always loved books. And so I've read all those books. They're some of the greatest classics ever, and I've enjoyed them. And then there are school books. I'm a homeschooling mom, and I've been teaching my kids. And it was funny, the other side of that, being little and seeing my dad's books, is the other day, my kids have done so well in school. I homeschool them, but they've done really well. And one's in PhD in chemistry, and another's got a master's in this, and they've just done really well. And I was saying, why why are you all so good at school? Because it's not me. And they said, because you introduced books to us when we were really young and we loved them.
Yeah.
And I thought, interesting. That would be their key, was the love of good books. So does that kind of cover the bases?
No, it's interesting. I mean, I do like to share things that pop into my mind, and I'm thinking of almost like a cultural epigenetic, right? And I don't know if you explore ideas about gene sequencing or the on-off switches, but the epigenetic basically just means that something turns on, and that's what popped into my head when your kids, by memory, they say the reason why is because in that environment we had books that were probably celebrated and encouraged, and it transformed us in a way that is cultural, but it's also tied into the biology and genes. I don't know. I don't know if it's a real epigenetic thing, or
I think there's definitely a genetic transcendence that's gone on. My daughter, she learned languages very easily, and again, my dad knew a lot of languages. Not something was so easy for me, but it wasn't something I could make happen. It did happen, but it wasn't. And maybe I was a conduit, like I was a conduit, and it wasn't. It isn't just genetics though, because I love my dad, and even though I wasn't going to see him again for years and years and years, um, I remember feeling very fond of those books and having a very, happiness when I saw any book, and my mom loved books. My mom was a great reader. We would go to the library together. So I think the love and the good things that were good about my family, despite the things that did go wrong, involved good books. And so that love, and me loving my kids, I wanted them to have some of the good things I had, and I think that is a carry-all too. It's not just a genetic ability that, yes, they have the capability and they have the yes, you can turn those switches, but if we had grown up in a more chaotic, if there had been a war going on, or if we didn't have enough food, or if I had been gone working and I wasn't able to be there for them to do that, it would have changed the whole dynamic. Maybe they would have still loved books, but I think my loving books and loving them kind of carried on the tradition, a good one.
Yeah, I get your point. I do. All right, so tell me about your childhood. Let's go back to what a young Anne would have been like. Sometimes I throw that question out, and the guests don't know where to start, right? Like, should I go to 5 years old, or should I go to 15, or something like that? So, were you a brownie?
That's no. My parents were. I was the youngest of 6. Again, my dad was a highly educated, he was a professor, and my mom was highly educated. They were both brilliant, and that may have been part of the problem. But it was in the 1960s that I was the youngest, and my parents took my brothers and sisters before I was born and lived in England for a year. Did a lot of traveling for my dad's books, and then when I was 2 and 3, we lived in Spain for a year, part of his Fulbright. So there was all of that dynamics. But we were also going up in the 60s. It was a university campus life. And then drinking became a problem. And especially for my mom, it became a huge problem. She was institutionalized a couple of times, attempted suicide, just broke her. And it broke their marriage. And then my brothers, my sister, they all started using either drugs, alcohol, sex, whatever. It became a problem for all of them at some point in their life. And but they all left, and then I stayed because I was the youngest. I couldn't leave. Um, but they all had their purpose and their journey. And I'm not trying to make them sound like they were all dysfunctional. They had issues, but they managed to function even despite a broken
Mm.
family and issues. And it was a society at that time. There was so much chaos. Um, but I stayed home, and then my mom rented room to foreign students. And
Mhm.
so I grew up with people from all over the world. And it was, I think it was one of the most wonderful ways to grow up. I grew up with people from China, from India, from
Mm.
Venezuela, from Africa, from just all over the world. And some people had religious bents, some people had none, but they were all students and they all worked hard. Um, and so, and it was, we would be in the kitchen and people would be making different dinners and there'd be hot, spicy smells and, tea
Mhm.
being made and everybody up at different times because of schedules. And so it was a very active place. And then on the other side, my mom also had a daycare. So we had like 5, 6 little kids, and you're trying to teach them to finger paint or you're taking them outside and playing with them. So it was both this highly academic, highly driven, because these are students who are coming from, some of them, very first time somebody in their environment is able to go to school. So they're very driven. And then you have these little bouncy kids. So at the time, it was a little on the chaotic side, but it was wonderful. And it gave me such a love for humanity, a love for the vibrance of different people and people who are Pakistani and Indian, and they're in the house, and there may be political stuff. There was people who had countries that were quite literally at war with each other, but they were not at war in our house.
Mm.
They
That's
got
cool.
to know each other, and I remember distinctly them saying, because we had Chinese, we had people from Singapore, Taiwan. Remember them saying, "We're leaving that back there. We're
Yeah.
not bringing that here."
Mm.
Um, Hearing some of their life stories, what they've been through, talk about a perspective,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah.
So
Kind of
it
grounds
was
you, right?
fantastic way to grow up. It was hard, but it was fantastic.
Yeah. I feel that from you. Um, so So the audience may or may not know, but you've written several books, and I'm thinking 8, but is that the right number?
17.
17. See,
Yeah.
I mean, it's incredible. Um, when you're thinking of your childhood and as you're growing up, was it at that point? Like, how early did you know what you
Oh, I
wanted to
was
be? Or
writing when I was really little.
really?
Um, and I don't know why, but it was terrible. I couldn't spell to save my life.
Yeah.
Oh, I got so many F's on my spelling papers. And spell check has been the salvation of my writing career, I'll tell you. That and Grammarly. But yeah, I always wanted to write. And then in college, I got an education degree because it was something I knew I could do. And I needed to get out. And by that time, I was an adult, and my mom's drinking had gotten so bad, and I could not just be her crutch anymore. So I needed to get out. And I joined a volunteer. I worked for the Dominican Sisters on the south side of Chicago. But um, I wanted to write, but I couldn't. I wasn't very good at it. I was really bad at it. I was a terrible writer, to be honest. I used to go and watch they had a really good acting school at the UWM, at the University of Wisconsin Milwaukee, and I used to go in and watch the actors, and I thought they were just fantastic. And watching them put a play, dissect it, talk about it, take those roles, that was very interesting. And it helped
Mm.
me somehow or another process how to tell a good story, but
Hmm.
it didn't teach
Interesting.
me to write.
Hmm.
It started to feed that side of me, but it didn't give me the tools. But I did give a story to somebody, and they I think they were just too polite to tell me how bad it was. But I had to go off. I had to live, and I had to get something worth writing, I guess.
Wow, that's really interesting. I have to say that I did read one of your books, and I found it really good. I found that you captivated me and kept my attention for the entire book.
Well, thank you.
And I can't for the life of me think of what the title was, but
Homestead?
Homestead,
Was that
yes.
Homestead?
I
Yes.
think so. It's the one
Yeah.
that also had an Audible too, right? Is it
Yes,
your only
yeah,
Audible?
Homestead.
And just, listener beware. Anne has some pretty far out plots here. This is set with some alien invasions and some really interesting. You play with some very interesting levers in your story, right?
I try. Life is full of interesting levers, so why not?
So I mean, is it just like let's see how crazy we can? Let's put a bunch of ingredients in, and why the aliens? Like what? I mean,
well, originally the first books I wrote was The Road Goes Ever On, which was a Christian journey through the Lord of the Rings, but that was nonfiction. But when I first started writing fiction, I went back to the time of Abraham and I made historical fiction. It was a total historical fiction. Again, it was a great idea, a good story, but it wasn't particularly well written. And then I got a lot of feedback from other writers saying, "Well, really need to work on your craft." And so I went and got the master's degree from Full Sail, and that was like in screenwriting, which is very different than novel writing, but it was very, very helpful. It really forced me to learn the craft of putting words together lyrically and really expressing them well, so that I tightened it up a lot. So then while I was doing that, as I was just going through that, my husband of 19 years after the 8th baby had been born came down with leukemia and then passed away. And those big, big, big questions that I kind of put away and put on a nice shelf and said, I'll deal with them later because I've got babies to take care of and dinner to make, all came back. Where did John go? And is this all there is? Is this my relationship with God, that I'm just going to have to trust you with John and trust you with me and trust you with my kids? And yeah, that's kind of how it goes. But the fact was everything kind of coalesced. And I had originally written kind of a science fiction book called Last of Her Kind years before, but I threw it away. I gave it up because I wanted to focus on the kids. But a lady I had known who had read it, just one of the few, after John's death, said, you go back to that book, go back and redo that. So when I got my master's degree, I went back and somehow I really do believe it was kind of a purgative effect of opening up my historical fiction, allowing me to look at Last of Her Kind as contemporary modern world, but then it has a whole science fiction element of aliens, because I suddenly started to realize, aliens, angels, supernatural, the otherness that I've lived with all my life, as a better part of me. I think now uniquely so, because I don't think people live with the otherness or talk about it. Maybe people are just too shy or they're too embarrassed, or you think, people are going to think I'm insane because I believe in something I can't see. I know there's more to this journey than the graveyard. I know there is. So science fiction helped me process that. And I think The Last of Her Kind was not just a personal journey, but it was also a culmination of anxieties and fears and very real questions about where is the human race taking us? Are we destroying ourselves? And would God let us do that?
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I'm gonna say, I'm gonna go out on a limb here, and I think I can give a better answer about that than you can in an instance. But it's a pastiche to and a testament to your writing, because as I was reading your book, I found that it wasn't so much about the aliens, or the aliens were kind of at a distance. It didn't really get into what that meant by aliens. And so it actually created a tension throughout the book because the aliens could have been, or it's almost like you painted the picture in a way that the aliens were just like a transcendent species. Right? And I'm not, I don't even need you to admit to it. It's completely, but the tension that you put in the book was like, oh, okay. She's kind of like manipulating that distance of maybe. So it was less about what actually the aliens were, other than they aren't us. Right. Or you, right? Because it's told from that first person, right?
Right.
So and there were anyways, I won't get into it in any more detail, but I will tell you that it was it's kind of a subtle gift that you have. You kept you kept my attention throughout the book, and some of those elements, those larger thematic strings, you kept at a distance, and that kind of kept me pulling me through the book, right? And sometimes it's not the story you tell, but it's also those underlying things that are pulling you through the book. And I think that's one of the I guess a not so well articulated defense for the Bible is all that emotive substrate that has been with us for centuries. So on that note, I think you took the compliment fairly well. And took it in stride with humility and grace, so that's good. We are at the quarterway point of, well, I shouldn't say that. We're at the quarterway point of what the show used to be, or what we like to pretend the show is going to be.
Okay.
It doesn't really work out that way. We usually go over, so you might see me at the end of the show.
Okay.
Wade's going to come back after this commercial break, and I want to remind the audience to please put your comments and your questions and your engagement into the chat, and let's just get to know Anne over the next hour and a bit. Okay, so commercial break, like, subscribe, and comments on the side.
That's an exciting trailer, Anne.
My humble efforts.
And well, I'm so glad to be back here in the studio with you, and I appreciate that Dan took the time to unpack so many things. I have jotted down a few notes and have probably more questions than we're possibly going to get to in the remainder of the show. But I wanted to first get into this topic of, I wanted to first mention something that Dan didn't, which is for the audience, it's not only about engaging to put your comments, thoughts, questions in the chat box, but you're going to be receiving a copy of Anne's book, one of her 17 books. If you are the one who made the comment that she likes the best, whether it's interesting, challenging, funny, provocative, helpful, whatever she decides. And then we will be sending a free copy of that book to the person whose comment is selected at the end of the show. But the first thing I wanted to get into was something that you said when you were talking to Dan about how in your home you had a variety of people from all over the world. And they were even discussing, in some cases, the challenges and even the politics of their nation, or not. There were people from countries that were even at war with each other, and the idea was, we're leaving that there. We're not bringing it here.
Mm-hmm.
So I wanted to just dip a little bit more into that, also in the context of other things you said about otherness and how the aliens
Mm-hmm.
were not us, and
Mm-hmm.
these themes you've woven into your book. It seemed like a theme that we should maybe talk about a
Mm-hmm.
little bit more, about this coexistence and how to get along despite the diversity that in your imagination is even greater than that which we
Oh yeah,
physically see around us.
yeah, exactly. You know, it was funny. I've I usually journal through most of my life, and I got rid of most of them, but I was been reviewing some of the earlier journals, just because it's been 10 years, and it just feels like a time to look over my life. But as I was looking back, there was a part where I was talking about how, and it surprised me because I didn't think I was that interesting. I was like, I wonder if the human race, because we're in these fleshy biological bodies, and we think we're just this one human race. But when you get to know people, and some people are so aware, and so, and I don't mean in a political term, I mean, they are there are people who are thinking so deeply. They're so beautifully put together inside that they can see and discuss and talk and be a be an interactive living experience with you. And that's just so incredible. And then there's people who are just fighting to survive. It's just a day in, day out. And then there's other people that is everything's an opportunity. It's just an opportunity to get something for themselves, and it's just all wrapped up around that. So what I was thinking and what I'd written down was, angels, the theory, or what I've read from theologians in the past, is that angels there isn't angels aren't like one angel and they're just they're everybody's the same. Angels are as different from each other as humans are from angels. The dichotomy between angels is that they're all so different. They have different jobs, they have different positions in the relationship with God. And I thought about that, and I thought, well, we all may have fleshy bodies, and maybe we think, oh, that's what divides us, but maybe that's what's holding us together. We're all created by the same God, and we appear all human, but on the inside, have we been created by God for different ministries, missions, purposes? Are we, in fact, very different from each other, and intentionally so? And is that really a bad thing? Isn't that, in a way, the glory of God's in, infinite creativity, infinite glory, that he can create us to be so different? And I think we get caught up in because of our human need to box things up, to categorize. Um, but I think, on the other hand, it can also be just so fantastic when we are able to, like the renters, say, I love my country, but I'm putting that there. And when I'm at my mom's house, we call them they call her Mrs. B. When we're at Mrs. B's, we're just together. We're just here. We're just students together. And I love that when human beings can do that. It's just amazing.
Well, I also love how you took us way out there in a sort of a thought experiment about many things, and then brought it back to the specific question at the end as well. I really I really appreciate that, and I want to try to do the same on the same theme, and that is that when you talked about this thought that you had some time ago, I actually had a similar thought, and I can remember the moment in time many years ago when I had this question. And I have had, for large portions of my life, religious blinders on.
Hmm.
Now, these blinders actually helped me during that time. It was necessary in my belief about myself and my development, that I had this rigid thinking because I had so many traumatic experiences as a child. It was a necessary phase of my development. It was helpful. But I remember when I started to emerge from that phase of my development, it was with the thought, with the question. So did God, is there like a lake of spirit in which God sticks a spoon in and puts a dollop in each person, right?
His beingness.
And well, yeah, I was thinking more of the spirit in man, the
Mhm.
soul. And I realized it can't be so because he says he knew various ones in the womb. And so there's an individuality
Mhm.
about us that predates our fleshy body.
Mhm.
And in the question of nature and nurture, based on my understanding of the Bible, there's some specific nature. And then he says, I will remember you in the day that I make up my jewels,
Mhm.
plural. And there are all different kinds of jewels
Mhm.
as well. And then elsewhere it says, he's going to give us a new name
Mhm.
um, that only he knows,
Mhm.
right? And it seems like there's very much this idea that God is handcrafting
Mhm.
each one of us.
Infinitely so.
And that this happened before we were born and will continue, and that there's a kind of a reveal where we begin to understand the very specific purpose he had in mind.
Mhm.
We'll get back into whether this involves choice or not,
Mhm.
because that's another thing that came up actually before the show. But the respect that we then have for these differences, right,
Mhm.
versus this otherness, right, where we somehow don't like or respect these differences.
It would. I think. Wait. When I say otherness, I'm talking about um, what, for lack of a better word, is supernatural. The otherness of angels, the otherness of where people go after they die, whether you believe it's in hell, purgatory, heaven, uh, whatever it is that your religious um, uh, program allows you to carry that thought so that you're comfortable, because we as human beings, we need to have some answers, we need to have some comfort, we need something to hold on to, you know because if, oh, they just died and he's gone, that's why we need rituals, we need religion, because religion does help us deal with these awesome, important, and valuable questions. But i but the 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 sad, kind of the other side of that coin, is when we block the infinite, the creative spirit of God, who, I'm a Catholic. I love the tradition of being Catholic. I don't agree with the structure of the church and mistakes that human beings make. I don't agree, of course, but I'm a broken person too. I make mistakes all the time. I'm not the judge. I am simply another person in progress. The people in my house, some were Islamic, some were Buddhist, some were atheists. We had a Chinese professor who had grown up, but he had a mother who was, I believe, Christian, but they'd never been able to talk about it until he came to this country and he began to realize what she must have gone through. Um, so everybody is a work in progress, but I think that, as Tolkien put it, the splintered fragment of the eternal truth. We are all splintered fragments. And when we talk to each other, when we read each other's work, when we see each other's art, when we go to school together and have discussions or podcasts, we enrich each other. We grow the godness in the human experience that we're having here now, because I do not believe this is it. We are not done. God is far too creative to say, that's it, you're done, can't do any more with you. There's just too many unanswered questions, too many people die suffering in pain, and it seems too horrific to say, oh, that's just how it is. I can't live that way.
Yeah, we're going to get back to that here in a few minutes. I want to circle back on some things that came up in the opening
Mhm,
segment, in light of those questions, right?
mhm,
Because you had said, well, Dan brought out that your books feature aliens, and you've of course brought up angels. And as the audience knows, I'm very, very familiar with the Bible. Spent my whole life studying it. It does talk about angels,
mhm,
and it does talk about them in different terms. Lucifer was the light bringer, but Gabriel and Michael, they have different
mhm.
roles, right? And they carried out different functions. And so we do have some glimpses into that realm.
Mhm.
Um, but the Bible doesn't mention aliens. So I have to ask, are you do you, and this is not a trick question, it's just conversation and interest. Do you personally believe that aliens exist?
Aren't angels aliens? I mean,
Yes.
think about it. Aliens are simply foreign to us.
So
I'm saying there's
you're saying that there's the possibility that aliens are creatures that God might have brought forth on
absolutely,
different
there is no
planets?
alien that God didn't have a part of.
Well, but my question is, angels as traditionally understood
Mhm,
were, yeah, I guess certain, now my mind is, I'd never thought of this before. There's nothing in the Bible that would indicate that they might not have been beings that are from other worlds that pre-existed us and thus were created by God in that manner.
mhm,
But there are descriptions about the angels, such as that they don't procreate,
mhm,
right? That
mhm,
they
mhm,
are neither male nor female, and so certainly if they are, then in that sense aliens, in the sense of from different worlds,
mhm.
right? um, then they certainly would have had a very different origin than ours.
Right, right, and I mean, again, the Bible didn't, talk about the internet, and it exists. There's things that we just simply can't interpret because we just weren't, and I haven't been capable of interpreting the fullness therein. God is infinite, and
Well, I would submit that the Bible did predict the internet. In this is a cheeky, thing to say, but in the book of Daniel, right?
Mhm,
What did he say? That in the end times, men would go to and fro and knowledge would increase,
mhm,
right? It's a description of the global transportation network and the explosion of information. um, and then he said, still only the wise would understand, and the
mhm.
book would be sealed and shut. So I just thought I'd throw that out there. But why would God not explicitly tell us about aliens? Just curious what your thoughts are on there.
And I don't, and see, again, I guess part of me has had to learn as a mom to get comfortable with the fact that I don't
Full
know.
disclosure, I do believe that there are aliens. I do believe that there are creatures on other worlds.
Mhm,
I won't get into why I
mhm.
believe that today, but I do believe that.
And
So
I don't know whether God has or not. I don't know if there's gonna be this sounding silence. I don't know. But I do know that, um, part of my creative spirit is to imagine like God imagines us, and He allows me to imagine. And again, anything for me, in order to be truly life giving, in order to really get me up in the morning and do the 101 ordinary things that need to be done in order for my life to go the way I have prioritized it, which puts my kids first, my family. Um, the writing process of imagining and thinking and processing, and I have a very vivid dream life that I sometimes need to work out, okay, what was that all about? um, these experiences, and I have had it when I was in the Philippines. I remember a very distinct time, and I mean, I was in some dangerous spots where I was not exactly in the safest of places, but I remember feeling protected, and I cannot explain that. There was no physical person around me, but I remember feeling very physically protected. And yeah, it is part of our Catholic tradition, but I was not educated in my Catholic faith at all. So I was a very ignorant Catholic. And in raising my kids, in dealing with all of the things that I've had to deal with through my life, being in rough neighborhoods, teaching in rough places, raising 8 kids alone. Um, there, I have always had this sense of supernatural protection. And I mean, that doesn't mean I haven't been hurt, doesn't mean that I haven't, had some pretty darn close calls, and doesn't mean I won't die in a car accident tomorrow. But the fact of the matter is, I do believe in providential care, and I call upon providential care. I do believe there is a dialogue that we can talk to God and his great creative other, and I fill in the blank. Is it an angel? Is it a guardian angel? Is it I don't know. And I have to be okay with not being able to define everything, but to know
Well,
that something more is here than what I see.
yeah, what we do know as people of faith who believe in the Bible as the Word of God is that nothing happens to us that He doesn't allow.
Hmm.
And so that sense of protection is partly interpretation, right? Partly that faith applied to the times, what is it called? Time and chance, right?
Hmm.
That's how the Bible refers to, bad luck sucks to be you right now, right? Time and chance happens to all.
Hmm.
And yet our interpretation of that through faith is knowing that all things work together for good to those who love him and are called according to his purpose. Romans 8:28, as sensationalized by that movie or by that Netflix series Manifest that came out. The passengers on flight 828,
Oh,
right?
okay.
And that theme was gently woven through that whole series of somehow there's a higher purpose,
Hmm.
and somehow this is gonna, work out for good in the end. Which gets into this question of choice,
Right.
right? And one of my favorite books, we talked about books, or Dan and you talked about books, is Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl, and how he explores some of the survivors of the Holocaust
Mm.
to, believe that the reason they survived was exactly that positive attitude, whether they attributed it to faith in God or whether they were atheists,
Hmm.
right? They had a sense of meaning,
Hmm.
that there was some meaning to the
Hmm.
suffering that they were going through, and that they could derive meaning
Hmm.
from those experiences. That alone, in my opinion, is a choice.
Exactly.
How we choose to interpret
More than
is the most basic, profound nature, because nobody can ever take that away from you. There is nothing that can be done to you that removes the freedom to interpret your experience.
But is it just interpret? I do believe that it's been more than me just head interpreting. It has been allowing the presence, the life, by the term grace, meaning life of God, into me and my life and my children. That it is a real feeding and nurturing, and it is physical as well as mental and emotional and spiritual. And that's part of the reason why I think aliens are not impossible, because of that whole connection of life-giving force that allows a person to literally take in. Some people will say, oh, after reading that book or after having this discussion, I could go back and I could try again. I had the strength. Well, you know strength comes from an interaction of both the physical and the emotional and the mental. So I do believe God does quite literally feed us, and we do take him in to us. So it's not just a head game of I accept or I discern, but it is an acceptance, a true opening to allow God experience within us. And that's I think part of the reason why some people are able to endure incredible evil events in their life, because they are strengthened in a supernatural way.
Unpack that a little bit more for me, the difference between what you called the head game and the taking it in.
Okay, so there's, I think sometimes the human race, like the Enlightenment, we think if I can just figure this out, I will
Mhm.
save myself. I will get it right. We're going to get this right. I mean, in a way, Nietzsche, I mean, all the greatest philosophers, I think, therefore I am, the whole, not to politicize, but I think a lot of the people who thought they were going to save the world and end up killing a bunch of people in the process thought they could just figure it out. Let's get rid of the people who are not good, and we'll, only have the people that
Yeah,
are good.
when has a utopian vision not become
Right.
dystopian?
Well, yes.
Right?
And when we think we can fix ourselves, our own sinfulness, when I'm dealing with a tragedy, when I'm dealing with particular sin and by sin I mean some broken behavior, thinking, um, uh, obsession I can't get out of my head. I can't fix it. I can't make it go away. But when I pray, when I and it doesn't necessarily mean a prescribed prayer, though a lot of times I do lean on prescribed prayers, but when I open myself to God and I give it to him and I say, I cannot fix this. I cannot be a single parent and do this right. I
Yeah,
cannot make death okay. I cannot make a tragic death okay. And
right.
yet miracles do happen. Things healing takes place. My mind calms down. At night, I'll wake up at 3 in the morning, start thinking about this and this and this. I've got to get this, and I'm worried about that. And in my head will start going. But if I start praying and I give it to God and I say, I'm handing this to you and I mean it, physically, I will calm down. I will get a good night's sleep. And even though I may be tired, I get up in the morning and I can function well enough to do what I need to do. So, and that's been repeated and repeated and repeated over and over again to prove to me.
Well, and I think the evidence is there: 8 children and 17 books, um, and the time to sit and talk to me tonight. I want to thank you for the way in which you unpack that, because you actually helped me um, with a challenge I've had, and that is I wanted to know, because I heard you and understood and believed what you were saying. But the way that I've expressed it in the past is more the former. I get it now.
Hmm.
But really, what it is it's that, and I'm a Baha'i.
Hmm.
There's a prescribed Baha'i prayer that can be prayed daily. Typically between noon and dusk.
Hmm.
It's simple. It goes, I bear witness that thou hast created me to know thee and to worship thee,
Hmm.
which I always love, because Baha'is teach that God is unknowable.
Hmm.
And yet the prayer that we're supposed to pray is, I was created to know thee. Right? So there's a cone,
Yeah.
right? I bear witness that thou hast created me to know thee and to worship thee. I testify at this moment to my powerlessness and to thy might,
Mm.
to my poverty and to thy wealth. There is none other God but thee. The and though I've prayed this prayer a million times now, suddenly the last little bit I'm forgetting. So I'm going to look it up, just so that if there are any Baha'is listening, they won't condemn me to hell, which Baha'is don't really believe in anyway. To There's none other God but thee, the help in peril, the self subsisting. Right.
Hmm.
So very short prayer, but it reorients your thinking
Hmm.
in the way that Jesus did when he said, "Not my will be
Hmm.
done, but thy will."
Hmm.
And that's what I mean when I say our interpretation,
Hmm.
right? Looking at it through that lens, that there is a higher power,
Hmm.
that it does have meaning. I probably don't have it figured out right now.
Hmm.
And that's okay, because this this will come back. And sometimes it's 10, 20, 30 years later
Hmm.
that you remember an event and say, oh,
Hmm.
that was preparation
Right.
for
Hmm.
this,
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, isn't that a sweet
right?
spot when you do get those little aha moments? But the other part of it was, I remember one day, um, I don't know what it was, but I was eating something, and I thought to myself, I am being nourished. And when you're eating, you're eating and you chewing but I'm not being nourished then. I'm being nourished 3 hours later when my corpuscles are breaking this all down into food and I have no idea. And I think that's the way God works all the time.
Interesting. Yeah,
I'm
you get an instant full feeling, and it feels good. And carbohydrates mixed with your saliva turn into sugar, and you get a little rush.
right.
But the nourishment,
That real breakdown
yeah,
isn't when we're even aware of it. And I think God does that with us all the time. We're thinking
yeah,
it's when I prayed. Well, no, God's working, transforming us, changing us, allowing us, growing us into these. I really think that the fulcrum of Jesus Christ as God man is what he's calling us to become more than just human. We have this, and that's what the sci-fi is all about. All of my sci-fi are this pendulum we swing between being called to humanity on this high level that God has created us for, to the bestiality of dust and just animal nature. And this this pendulum that we live on, that we swing back and forth. My animal wants, I want that pie, or I want food, I want sex, I want whatever it is that you're lusting after and falling to, or that. And you can say, I'm going to discipline myself. Yes, absolutely. Discipline yourself. I try all the time. But we can't do it on our own because it isn't all us. We need to accept the presence, that grace, that life into us to be grown into something more than
yeah.
human beings.
Well, as a Catholic, I know that Mary is very highly venerated in the Catholic faith. And of course, Mary was the virgin who gave
Hmm.
birth, right? And that's a really amazing piece of the whole story, because Jesus later talks about being born again, but there
Hmm.
are different Greek words for born, and one of them is really begotten, right?
Hmm.
Um, so the the way that I understand born again is that we are begotten of God.
Hmm.
We have been impregnated now,
Hmm.
and we are growing now in the womb. And
Hmm.
this life is actually the womb. And so we also are then the product. Jesus is the firstborn of many brethren.
Hmm.
We are the product of the exact same metaphor,
Hmm.
um, but even more powerful literally, in that this whole life's experience is a womb. And when we pass on to the next life,
Hmm.
those characteristics that we have been enabled to develop through the nurturing and nourishment from our Father,
Hmm.
through that begotten experience in this life, it is
Hmm.
developing the fruits of the Spirit, the traits, the qualities, the virtues that
Hmm.
we will in fact take with us.
Hmm.
You can't take it with you. Oh yes, you can. You can take those things that you develop within your soul, within yourself, in
Hmm.
this life. And then when we are born again and we pass through the matrix into the next world,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
Um, we have those quality and characteristics which we were given choice to co-develop
Hmm.
with
Hmm.
God's grace.
Right. I mean, I I you see it all the time with people who are extraordinary. Is that um, they were not extraordinarily courageous because they were never afraid. It's because they were terrified. That's what courageous. That's where courageous gets born. Is in fear, in horror. People who have dealt with just horrible family situations, and they love anyway. They turn around and they love their kids, even though they were beaten and abused as children themselves, and they turn around and they can nurture their own children. that is that nurturing, that heroic, growing otherness inside of ourselves. It is something so extraordinary that it says, I didn't know that human beings could go that place, but there are people and they do exemplify it. I mean, there's all of the people who have lived that.
Yeah, and that is also a choice, and it's a choice that can be made when we are more easily when we are encouraged to make it, right? Because there's so many forces around you that will tell you, do unto others before they do unto you, right? And get your revenge, and revenge is a dish best served cold, or whatever, all those sayings, right?
Mm-hmm.
And there are many forces that are that devil whispering in this ear,
Mm-hmm.
when you have those experiences, and when you want to sort of embrace the hurt side and the mistreated side. One of my favorite sayings, which my kids absolutely cannot stand, is life is not fair, and that's
Right.
fair.
Right. Well, we all are on that same plane. If there is
Right.
anything fair about this world,
That's
it's that
exactly my
we are
point.
all on that same unfair journey. And you can say, oh, but some people are born into such better circumstances. All that's true. I mean, there are all different levels of
Right.
people's
And then there's,
suffering and pain, but how we deal with it, how we deal with success, how
yeah.
we deal with failure, how we grow,
And then
that's
there's that
our interaction.
then there's that famous song, about Richard Cory, right? The very rich man. And then Richard, he's in the newspapers and he's famous, and all people saying, "Oh, I wish that I could be Richard Cory." And then Richard Cory goes home and puts a bullet in his head, right?
Right.
And
Right.
all, you know what I mean? So it's like, yeah, these fantasies that we have in our minds, where we spin up these jealousies, and the envy, and the fact that we were treated unfair, and the fact that we're a victim, the fact that we were bullied. Not to minimize anyone's personal experience, which in many cases they experience things more horrific than me, but they also didn't live in a tent in Alaska during their senior year in high school and had a stove blow up in their face and burn 2 layers of skin off of their whole
Mm,
face, that I went through, to where they went into
mhm.
hypothermia, because they were in a place without water and electricity, and were putting snow on their face and laying, it's like, you follow me?
Everybody's
So,
got a story, right? Yeah.
right. And I could go on and on and on about, my circumstances, and what, when I was growing up, they used to just do this and say, you know what, this is the the world's smallest violin playing My Heart Bleeds for You. It's
Right.
like the whole snowflake aspect of, and I'm sure you had to experience this growing up with your children, that you didn't you helped them not wilt at every setback, or every challenge, or every difficulty as they were growing up.
Well, I think there's two things that you've made me think about. One is that everybody is having a different experience and nobody else actually does walk in another person's shoes. So really the conversation, who's the worst victim here? I had it worse. I had it worse. You know, but is that really how you want to identify yourself? Because like I said, it's the person who's been terrified or been abused and then turns around and changes that. They're the ones who are the true heroes. They're the ones who are the remarkable ones. They're the ones who are growing. And when you're growing, then you don't need people to tell you you're a victim. You don't want people to tell you're a victim because you're no longer living a victim. You're living something bigger and better. But the other side of that is there is an enslavement. And I think drugs and alcohol can take people over. Mental illness, uh, biological mental illness, serious depression, where people do go and just put a bullet in their head. Um, those are very real factors, and free will is strongly affected by those. And again, I'm not God, and thank God I'm not God, because that's um, I I've had family members who have done atrocious things, and I love them anyway. But I know that part of the reason that they did those particular things at those particular times was because of mental illness or addictions. And um, I I think that's when Christ says, love your enemy. He's really also saying, uh, let me be God. You, you love as I love, but let me be God. And I do think that sometimes we take away the gift of being able to love and serve appropriately with boundaries, yes, but at the same time love the broken and the disheveled and the enslaved, because we think, well, you know, they don't deserve it. And the fact of the matter is, when we love other people, we're growing ourselves. We're making ourselves into better people. It's not just the gift to the other person to forgive them, it's a gift to us.
Well,
We're not just, um, you know what, and to not judge their hearts and souls. Oh yeah, you can say that's terrible behavior and it shouldn't be done, and yeah, consequences need to come into effect. Absolutely, I do not condone evil behavior, but I also recognize that people who do evil things are still people. They're still human beings. Hating them doesn't do a bit of good.
well, the Bible's very clear on not judging. Who are you to judge another man's servant? And we are all servants of God.
Hmm.
So none of us have the right to judge anybody else, and that's so fundamental.
Hmm.
But we do have the responsibility to set standards and
Hmm.
to teach those things that are helpful and those things that are hurtful, and
Hmm.
set boundaries and then enforce those boundaries.
Hmm. I just think the issue of the chemical and slavery of alcohols and drugs and other disorders, sometimes we think, well, that just he's just no good or she's just no good, and we make a judgment call when we really, unless you've been that person, it's
Right.
I'm not saying it's right, I'm just saying it's sometimes very hard for us as human beings to be able to let go of the judgment side.
Yep. Well, we're going to go to a quick commercial break here, and I'm going to encourage everybody once again to put their comments in the chat. We have a few in there. I'd like to see more. So this next, we've skipped over one or more commercial breaks just in the interest of keeping the conversation flowing. But I'm going to go ahead and play a trailer for another book that Something or Other Publishing will be giving away. So we'll actually be giving away 2 books here at the end of the show. So get your comments in there, folks. And when we come back, we're going to dive a little bit deeper into this this issue that we've talked about around standards and judgment. And I'm going to share a couple of perspectives with you, Anne, and get your take on them. Stay tuned. We'll be right back.
One of America's greatest literary treasures, Mark Twain, once said, "I apologize for such a long letter. I didn't have time to write a short one." Get ready for a literary journey that's as rich and diverse as the flavors in a fine wine. Introducing 25 Servings of Soup, a literary tasting of established and rising talent. These stories aren't just enjoyable on the surface. Each one carries a special note, a subtle exploration of social issues, a celebration of diverse characters, and a spotlight on the challenges faced by those different from us. As you turn the pages, you'll find not just entertainment, but a profound invitation. An invitation to understand, respect, love, and empathize with others better. Dive into 25 Servings of Soup, literary journeys into life, meaning, and love. Because great stories are meant to be savored, shared, and remembered. Grab your copy today.
And to add a little additional plug and a little QR code there in case somebody wants to order that. And I forgot earlier, we'll put the QR code up for your book, Last of Her Kind, here in a bit as well. You can order this directly, but this book was recently awarded the National Association of Book Entrepreneurs Award of Excellence for anthologies. I don't think this award was recent. There's like a seal that you can put on the cover. We'll have to have that updated. But you can scan that QR code and order your own copy, or you can start, hammering your comments into the chat. and hope that your comment gets picked here, and we'll send you a free one. But while I'm on it, let's go ahead and show the QR code there for Last of Her Kind, and make sure that you bookmark that. You can just hold your phone up, and that way, in case you don't win, you can order your own copy of Anne's book. So, Anne, we were talking right before the break about judgment, judge not lest you be judged, and all of that kind of thing. We've talked a lot about choice. I was recently reading an article about Thomas Sowell, who is a great thinker. He's an African-American who's dived deep into the social sciences and analyzed data around performance. His interest is particularly race, being Black, and with those topics going on in the country. And he highlights behaviors such as study, right? You mentioned, I think, reading, but he measured, well, who spends time studying. Now, of course, there are environmental, socioeconomic factors that make it easier and harder for people to study, but study is a determinant, right? Study is a determinant for success, material gain, doing well in society. And this cuts across some of these other lines of race, right? So whether one is, Asian, Black, white, African-American, or from Africa, you can analyze the data in different ways, but study makes a difference. Similarly, there's this thing called the marshmallow test, which I don't know if you've heard of, and you can give it to a 2-year-old, and you give the 2-year-old a marshmallow, and you tell them, if they wait 15 minutes, they can have 2. And of all the sort of psychological tests that they give, this one has proven, over the decades to be a determinant that those children who have a proclivity to say, I'll wait and get that second marshmallow, statistically have done better in life by the standards of, material benefits. Now, happiness, and there are other ways to measure that, but in terms of those things that are often used to measure, equality, right? Those standards that are used to measure equality, the marshmallow test is one that seems to be determinant. So I think, in terms of choices, there are behaviors, and maybe we should, the educational focus and what we are teaching people as to that which is determinate. In my view, isn't that the purpose of religion? Religion should never coerce, but it should inspire. This has been a theme on this show. And it should teach those behaviors, those attitudes. It should teach us to be able to interpret our experiences in certain ways that allow us to be successful and allow us to become happy.
Well, I mean, of course, Mother Teresa came to mind, because I think of a person who didn't preach in the typical sense of, a sermon. She certainly shared her faith, but she lived it, and she lived the power of what was happening to her as she grew through her life. Again, that God infusion, I would say, lived through her and gave her the strength to do the things that she did, and she carried it forward. And she wasn't teaching. And I remember reading or seeing her once say, I'm not asking everyone to become Catholic. I'm wanting everyone to love, to accept the love that I know, and to allow that love to form them so that they can love, because that is, and I do, it's interesting because one of my kids is doing psychology or studying psychology, and Carl Jung came up, and I always think of collective unconscious, and I remember studying him and thinking, oh, there's something there, but I don't know what, and I can't define it all. But I do think, again, that study, what are you studying? You're reading another person's work. You're reading another splintered fragment of the eternal truth. You're taking in part of the human journey that I mean, there are writers who have written centuries ago. And I'm like, oh, this guy or this woman would be my best friend if I could just meet them right now. Because somehow we're connected. Poetry, sometimes it's so bare and open, you just feel like you know this person. Um, so I think that's one of the beauties of study. It isn't just the discipline of study, which, yes, waiting for that second marshmallow. If you liked uh, yeah, it's been able to wait, but it's been able to sit and prioritize. This is more important than and following a thought and being given the space and time to be able to follow a thought and to imbibe other human beings' experiences. And again, it goes back to what we talked about in the beginning: the love of books, the love of literature, the love of a good story. Um, I recently read a book by a woman, I can't remember the name of it, but she was talking about how, in one section, Tolkien and C.S. Lewis both said that Beatrix Potter was one of the most influential people in their lives, but neither one of them ever had the courage to go meet her. Um, but because of her imagination when they were little, and they were able to read or have her stories read to her, read her stories, and look at the pictures. And again, Beatrix Potter never knew, but she influenced two of the greatest influencers up to present day. And she probably never had any idea that her little splintered fragment of the eternal truth was flowing through her, flowing through them, which flows to us. And Beatrix Potter grew up a very isolated child, but she liked books and she liked animals. So I think we need to be fed, and study is a form of being fed, informed.
Thank you. Um, yeah, it's been such a pleasure talking to you. I feel like I've been enriched from having you share your experiences. I want to. We're towards the end of our standard first hour, and we always go overtime. And with your permission, if you're willing, I'd like to go just a few minutes more. Um, and I'd like to explore now. You know, you mentioned tragic circumstances in your life, and um, we're coming up on Christmas now, and you shared that you just recently celebrated the 10th anniversary of something that you call Pink Candle Sunday. Do you want to share with our audience what that's about and how that affected you?
Well, my husband had had leukemia for 4 years. He got sick shortly after my eighth baby was born, and he fought the good fight. Fought it very hard, and he was not. He was. The other homeschooling dads called him an Amish Paul Bunyan, because we bought this 4 acres and we lived on the land and we didn't use chemicals and we were raising our kids natural, which is, why we put this children's book he started it. It was The Adventures of Tally Ho, to homeschool and raise our kids on the land. Anyways, there are limits. We don't get what we want sometimes. He didn't get to live. And he died in the emergency room. But the way that day unfolded was, one of his favorite books was The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings. And he wanted to see that movie so bad. It was coming out. I think it was the second one. And so I knew he wasn't doing well. And it was the third Sunday of Advent, but he really, really wanted to go see that movie. So we went to the movie, and it had snowed, and it was bitterly cold. And we came home, and he just said, "I am so tired." And he went to sleep on the couch. And I thought, I'm not going to disturb him. Well, the next morning, it was Mass, and the boys were serving. They were altar servers, and we had guests from out of town who'd come all the way from Alaska to be with us and to go to the movie with us and to be with John. And I thought, I am not waking him up. He'll fall down if he tries to get to Mass. And I just didn't want him to fight that hard. So we went to Mass, and it was Pink Candle Sunday, which is the third Sunday in Advent, when the priest wears pink, and he reminds us that though we are always in expectation of Christ coming back, and we are working and striving towards that with our lives, that we need to remember the joy. We need to remember the joy in that this life experience where we're working towards something so wonderful. But at Mass, very end of Mass, a woman came up and tapped me on the shoulder and said, "John's in the hospital. He's in a coma. You need to leave now." And I'm stunned, but I thought, I'm going to finish praying. And I did. And then we got the kids and we went to the emergency room. And it was the most horrific end with all of the contraptions I had on him. And there will never be, ever, I can't imagine anything worse than having to get your 17 and my kids from 17 down to 5 in a line and have them kiss their daddy goodbye. And he couldn't respond. And I kept thinking about that pink candle. This is supposed to be a day to rejoice. And the irony of tragedy and how painful it was for me, for the kids, for his parents, for everybody who knew and loved him. He was a teacher at a prison. His prisoners were sending him cards to get well because they missed him. This was a well-loved man. There was no, oh, well, it'll all work out. There was none of that. It was just sheer agony loss. There was no good reason or rhyme. How did this come about? And yet, it's Pink Candle Sunday. So here it is. It's 10 years later. My kids have done incredibly well in their lives. They've gotten scholarships. They've gone to college. They've gotten good degrees. They've moved on in life. And they're just awesome people. And I was thinking this Sunday, as I was sitting there in Mass, John sees them. He knows. He never stopped loving them. And I've never stopped. Every morning I say my prayers. I say good morning to him. I say good morning to my mom and my dad. I love him. He will always know what we've gone through. He probably has got all sorts of suggestions of how I could have done it differently. But that's John. But at the same time,
quite possibly his thoughts are only admiration because of his heightened awareness.
Could be. I'm hoping some
right. Well,
I'm
just thinking that, and I don't know if I understood it correctly, but you had recently given birth to your youngest child at that time?
I had lost a twin in my 8th child. And then 7 months later, John came down sick.
So you would have had 9.
Yeah, we would have.
But you lost a
I
twin.
lost 2 previous pregnancies.
Got it. Okay.
But, but I mean, it was like
so you had 8 children,
living.
And when he died, then I assume the leukemia was. Okay.
My youngest was 5. Yeah,
so 15 5. Now. So
she just turned 15. Yeah.
Yeah. So I can only imagine that he would have admiration for you carrying on and no criticism from that vantage point. I can't imagine criticism from that vantage point of having passed on.
Right.
You follow me?
I'm hoping, as a matter of fact, the last time I was his grave, and I hate to go to the graveyard, and I know people, I take care of a cemetery, so I value that, but I hate to go to his graveyard just because I know he's not there, but also because I really wish, and because my name's on the gravestone right next to his, and I don't like to think about that.
You're not quite ready for that.
Yeah, I'm not there yet, but I want, when I was at the graveyard the last time, I remember sitting down and crying and thinking, if you and I could meet physically right now, we would love each other so much better because when you're raising kids and you're
Of
going to
course.
work and all the little stuff, that all gets in the way. Whereas I think we're both so much more grown up. I think,
Right.
I don't have his perspective, but I
Well,
think we do
you
share more of a perspective.
this actually gets to something that I thought of introducing earlier, but I will introduce it now. And that is the diversity and the otherness and even the difference. I was going to say earlier that, Catholics and Protestants have traditionally condemned each other to hell. Not
Isn't that
directly,
ironic? Yeah.
right? Not directly, but indirectly by doctrine, they do. And and we've been saying, judge not, right? Lest ye be judged. And the way that I have recently, in recent months, come to work towards universal ecumenicism, is that the first two commandments that God gave are in opposition to each other, and they apply to all humanity. And everybody today, whether they believe in God or whether they're the most radical anti-God atheist, they ascribe to trying to solve the challenge represented by these two commandments. The first commandment was given to Adam before Eve came along, and it was his purpose. It was dress and keep the garden. And his first task was to give names to the animals, to look at the different species, to look at their characteristics, and to give them a name. We talked about earlier how God knew us before we were born and has a new name in store for us and is crafting and shaping us. Adam's first job before even Eve came on the scene was to give names to the animals and to take care of the garden, to dress and keep the garden. Then Eve came along, and there was a new commandment: be fruitful and multiply. Now that one he had no problem keeping. And so man became the most invasive species the world has ever seen, and often neglected to dress and keep the garden.
Right.
And that's why I say even today, the most militant anti-God atheists are all about science, 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 and climate change. You follow me? And I'm not saying that they're all anti-God atheists. I'm just saying that the gloom and doom of the four prophetic horsemen are today announced by science. There's going to be global warming. The sun's going to get 10 times hotter, right? There's going to be pestilence. There's going to be death, right? The seas are going to rise, and there's going to be floods. The gloom and doom prophet today is science. They've taken on that role because they're recognizing that man has become the most invasive species the world has ever known. And so my point is, these two commandments are something that we can all recognize and all agree should be kept, that we need to bring them into balance. And this is actually the other thing that I wanted to bring into the conversation was when Eve took of that fruit and Adam took it, and in the story didn't stop her where God had given the instructions to him, and in that sense maybe failed in his role as a leader of this woman that God gave to him as his companion, whatever. Then God pronounces the so-called curses on them. And I'm not even going to read these so-called curses because they're so politically incorrect today. But they're not really a curse. They're an explanation of the consequence. It's the marshmallow test. It's like, look, if you can gobble down the marshmallow now, or you can wait and have two, really. But if you gobble it down now, here's what's going to happen. The woman's going to have pain in childbirth. She's going to become enslaved to her husband. Your desire will be to him, and he will rule over you. And for the husband, the earth is going to fight you. It's going to raise thistles and thorns, and you're going to have a long road to hoe. You're going to, in the sweat of your brow, you're going to earn your daily bread. You're going to become a slave to your family and be forced to work, endlessly forever to try to support the situation that you've now helped co-create. And you're going to become enslaved to each other unless you somehow figure it out And
Right.
that's not going to be easy. And the reason I was bringing this up now is simply, you mentioned growing up and loving each other more. Well, when you suddenly don't have the other helpmeet, when you don't have each other and you recognize that loss, I think you can and do have more appreciation for what the other one brings to the equation.
Mm-hmm.
And it's that empathy and sympathy that helps transcend that otherness.
Mm-hmm. Even more than that, I would say, as you were talking, it made me think about the whole origin of sin, and why did God allow it? You know, you think about the Job thing, but ultimately, what it keeps bringing back to me is the reality that our brokenness, our sin, our failure is how we allow God in. That the resurrection doesn't occur unless there's a crucifixion, that there isn't healing unless there's a wound, that there isn't, we don't become more until we realize our own not godness. And I think that's part of why I can now look at Pink Candle Sunday and rejoice, because it wasn't all about John dying. It was about so much more that God has grown us into, because that couldn't, you know, and say, oh, well, one person said, what was God thinking? And I'm like, I didn't know. But I kind of get it now. And I'm not saying I'm like okay with him dying, but I'm saying that we couldn't have become the people we are probably any other way. You say, why did they have to crucify Jesus? Why did children get born with diseases? Why are some children born with Down syndrome? Because that's how we learn to love. That's how we learn to be strong. That's how we learn to, when somebody is enslaved in some malady, that's when we learn to be heroic. That's when we learn to truly transcend the animal beast who takes care of itself.
Well,
So,
and scientific studies into how it is that Homo sapiens became so successful show that it was not the competitive nature and the, able to kill everything around them. I mean, that was an aspect of it, but how they got there was learning to cooperate, right?
mhm,
It was the
mhm,
cooperation
mhm,
and the ability to perceive oneself in the other shoes,
mhm,
the empathy
mhm,
and the desire to work together,
mhm,
and the ability, the skills, the social skills to do so, that
mhm,
helped us ultimately transcend and become,
mhm,
that. And of course, we're still striving to do that. The other thing is that, this statement by Paul, where he says, he invokes the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, in my opinion, when he says, he's criticizing the Corinthian church, who are the church that, you know, is used in most Sunday sermons when the minister wants to, correct his church. He starts
mhm,
reading from Corinthians, right? Because they're the ones with all the problems. Um, Paul, speaking to the Corinthian church, says that they were still drinking milk. They were in need of being taught again the first principles. They were babes in Christ, and milk belongs to, the immature, the infants. But strong meat, he said, belongs to those who, by reason of use, have exercised their senses to discern good and evil. So
mhm,
he invokes the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, which was forbidden. And in my opinion, he invokes the school of hard knocks and says, well, given
mhm,
that circumstance that we now find ourselves in,
mhm.
because of the choice that our great 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 grandparents made,
Right.
we have no choice but to exercise our senses to discern good and evil. We have to continue eating of that tree. We
Mhm,
have no other choice. We must imbibe of the Spirit, which gets to that perspective, that interpretation of things,
mhm,
the discernment, the wisdom that can be derived from the school of hard
mhm,
knocks. Because as we know, the definition of insanity is doing the same thing expecting a different result, right?
mhm,
Um, but it is that maturity to interpret those things and say, this is good and that's bad.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not the 2-year-old version of taste not, touch not,
Mm-hmm.
that was given to the Jews in the wilderness. I mean, that's great for
Mm-hmm.
2-year-olds. Don't touch that. Don't eat
Mm-hmm.
that, right? Don't handle that. But
Right.
as we become mature, we have to imbibe of the spiritual principles and discern what was that all about? What was that commandment all about and why?
And that actually makes me a little bit more encouraged because it does speak of a growth process for humanity. And when you think about the implosion of possibilities that human beings are up against right now, I mean, the birth pods that we're looking at creating, instead of having poor women have to suffer through pregnancy, we can have little birthing pods or synthetic genetically arranged babies, or just the biotechnological advances we're making, dangers we're facing for
Well,
our
I think
spirits
this
and our
this
souls.
right, the Sackler family and the opioid epidemic. If anyone's watched some of the recent really good series on what happened, the one of the principles as to why that happened and why so many millions of people have died is healthcare became about pain management, and there was a sinister profit motive behind it. But they started asking patients to self-disclose where they were on a scale of 1 to 10 on pain, right? In order to prescribe the opioids, which used to be only prescribed for people dying of cancer and horrible
Right.
pain. But because the Sackler family and Purdue Pharma got FDA approval for this time release version of the opioid, which was supposed to be safe and less addictive, which they knew wasn't. But because the FDA approved it for pain management, suddenly the entire focus of healthcare shifted towards pain management, as though avoiding pain were the purpose of everything, right?
Mhm.
Rather than healing,
Right. Right.
right? Not that we want people to suffer, but the point is, Hebrews 12 says God chastens every son whom he loves. The goal is not always to remove all pain.
Mhm. And that's what I'm saying. That's what kind of what makes me
Exactly,
hope
exactly.
is that the very painful process of growing up
I heard
and
that in what
learning
you were
and
saying. That's why I
developing.
wanted to bring that in. Yeah.
Yeah, it does. And what you're talking about is, I mean, we are facing unprecedented challenges of discernment. And there's a part of us, that terrifies me. But I look at my kids and I think, you've been more prepared than most to face these kinds of challenges, and it doesn't mean that. And the irony is that I know perfectly well that none of us do it perfectly. We're all going to screw up. We do, because we're human, and because we're owning pieces of a greater whole. But I do think dialogue, conversation, honesty, humility are the that's the those are the openings to the being fed, to being allowed to grow into the very people, into the very beings that can make good decisions. And yeah, there is a part of me that remembers there's a second judgment, and the human race is on a whole going to be judged. And how are we going to look in the end of this? Which is a lot of my sci-fi. That's why I bring up a lot of these questions um,
Well, I
about
have to ask then,
sentient
do you
AI.
have you incorporated, for example, Matthew 25, when the Son of Man comes in his glory, he will judge the nations. Have you incorporated that concept into any of your books?
That last of a kind has that. It is in there in the sense of the death of the human race as we knew it. And how does humanity gel with this? Who do we blame? And how do we accept our part to play? And are we open to the next step? And see, that's the thing. In Last of Our Kind, as I was writing the book, I kept thinking, how do I end the human race? Because I don't know what comes next. But that's the fun of the imagination, because there is a next step. I imagine a next step, and I think God has already imagined many next steps. And the joy for us, and that's why I can now I'm not happy on Pink Candle Sunday, but I have a peace that says things are as they must be. And we can accept that must be and take it with God's will and grow into a greater beingness. And there is hope there. Hope lives in faith. The only hope that I can ever have lives in the faith that there is a reason to be joyful because there's a lot more I don't see. There is a lot of otherness and beyond my sightness. And even the most tragic reality can take us to a new vista.
Eye has not seen nor ear
Oh,
heard.
yes,
I'm trying to
exactly.
remember the exact conclusion of that which the Almighty has prepared for those that love Him.
Right, right,
Something along those lines.
right, exactly, exactly. Yeah, yeah.
Well, Anne, what a pleasure. Let's, the audience, they were there for a while. A few of them were commenting. I think many may have, maybe a little bit late for many of them.
Mhm.
Um, but we don't have a whole lot of comments here. Are you able to see the chat, Anne?
Yeah, Daniel, some.
Yeah.
I
I'm going to
can't.
just show this one. This is Ensan, who does often make comments. His are kind of cryptic. It's sometimes hard to understand exactly what he's getting at. So I'm wondering if you're able to understand here. Coda and is an ordering sentence to return to one's heart conscience. This was made earlier in the
Oh,
show,
it's in Farsi. Yeah, Persian Farsi. Okay.
right?
Inside judge, self-conscious, the inner higher mind. Yeah,
I think he was talking about this maybe when you were sharing your
about
own
the otherness.
the otherness and also your creative side,
Hmm.
maybe the dreams.
Hmm.
I wanted to ask you too, when you mentioned Jung, if you had used some of your study into Jung to help you understand your own dreams.
Oh, it's funny. My daughter was interpreting my dream the other day, and I was like, we were just laughing because, again, it's just it is a case of where I just don't know. It could be just a relief valve for some of it, but my level of dreams are so vivid and go on and on. I mean, they're novels in themselves. So, I think it's a gift of God to be able to dream, and there's night dream and there's daydream, but I try not to daydream too much because you want to get those dishes back in the right place. But it is a case of where there's, I think, a living uh, openness to God's dream in us. And as we open ourselves to that God's dream in us, so possibilities become so fruitful and joyful again, and it doesn't mean life is perfect. It doesn't mean that I don't get frustrated and uh but it does mean that those are just passing moments, and like you
Well,
said, it's not the don't worry about the marshmallow, there'll be
I,
dinner, we'll take
I
care of it.
I do believe that our spirit, our soul, is given access to the other side when we are sleeping. It is a,
Mhm,
you know, and again, the Bible refers to death as sleep, right?
mhm.
So when our as you called it, our fleshy body, I forget exactly the term you used, um, is dormant,
Mhm.
our spirit is free to soar and
Well, God
explore.
certainly spoke to us in dreams. I mean, throughout
Right.
the Bible, He does that. He reveals Himself and He reveals His wishes. And I think there is definitely that. Um, so, I mean, it's just one of those things where I think I swear I've met people in dreams that I've never met anywhere else. Um, so I don't know, but I guess I don't get too wedded to defining it because that's why I like to write, because it allows me to kind of live out in a visual story form, some of that creativeness of I don't think I think when we're awake, we're just kind of putting that dreamscape, that otherness aside
Sure.
so we can focus.
Well,
And
for me personally,
that's more real to me sometimes than this is.
yep.
So,
Yeah, I think I've often said, I don't know if it's true or not, but it's kind of my take on things, that the hardest thing for God to reveal to any of us is the truth about ourselves, right?
uh,
And so
yeah.
this discernment of good or evil probably takes a different form for each and every one of us. But for me, I struggle with a sense of responsibility. Am I performing the responsibilities that God expects me to perform? Or is my ego involved and am I taking too much upon myself? And the balance between those two things, between I don't have to do it, or God telling me, slow down, stop grabbing a hold of everything that comes your way.
Mhm,
Don't grab a passing dog by the ears, as it says in
mhm,
Proverbs, right?
mhm.
Um, don't let your hand meddle with that which doth not belong unto it, which is another thing in the Baha'i writings, right? Um, I often don't have the answer to that on a daily basis in a given situation. Am I supposed to take action here, or am I supposed to trust in God to do it? Am I supposed to grab the shovel, or am I supposed to pray? Right?
Right, right.
Um, I often don't have the answer to that, and so oftentimes in my dreams, I have gotten a sense of
Mhm,
where that balance is, and it comes from Jung and what an automobile is. Um, in our dreams and what an automobile symbolizes, because whenever I have a dream about a car where a car is involved, which is not often,
mhm,
the car is symbolic of just that. Am I in the driver's seat? Am I in control?
mhm.
Should I be driving this car?
Right,
And
right, right.
I recently had a dream where somebody else had stolen my car and they were driving it, right? And that was helpful to me in a certain circumstance. One of the
Right.
most powerful dreams I ever had was I was under a car fixing it,
Mhm.
and the jack fell off, and some piece of metal went through my shoulder and literally pinned me to the ground under the car,
Wow.
and I could not move. I was totally fine, and it was like, and specifically in the dream, it was like it went through in a non-harmful place. I
Uh-huh.
wasn't really hurt,
Right.
but I was pinned by the car.
Mhm,
And this was a
mhm.
clear, obvious statement. Let
Right,
freaking go.
right, 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 right. Yeah.
This is not for you to solve.
Right, right. Yeah, I do think that God does, and the 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 otherness, and that could also be even with like and I'm very, very respectful of the veil that God has put in place for a very good reason. That's why I think people who um, try to get into the other world, and people who have
Right.
died, and they can be all sorts of attacks because you don't know who you're letting in, and we're not. It's
I
like drugs.
I
We're not
I
able to
agree.
handle all of that.
I completely agree with you there. I'm not advocating go search out mystics and
Right, right, right.
no, that's not what I'm saying. But
Right.
there, but
No, no, I get
again,
that. I'm
it's
just
this
saying
balance. It's this balance, right?
that there's
Discernment.
God has given us dreams for a reason, like
Right.
you said. And I think He does allow communication that way. And I think prayer, uh, to me, prayer is very close to some of the dreamscapes I get to, in that mm, place I get to when I'm allowed in deep prayer. There's I don't know, there's something, and it's real, and it can completely solve problems, settle a horrible inner wound, reorientate my life in a positive way even when things are going very bad. So um, I think dreams and prayer, and some people try to grab that through drugs, alcohol, or other synaptic fiber shoot offs. But I think we're not really intended to do that. There's a reason that veil is there, and to try to grab it from God, or to try to grab power that way, like I said, not all spirits are nice ones, and there are some very, very powerful, and they're all more powerful than us, and we're very, very small, and we shouldn't be meddling
Right.
without, the sanctification of God's grace.
Amen. Well, Anne, I'm again looking through the chat. This has happened a couple of times, doesn't always happen. But I'm going to say we will monitor the comments after we publish this.
That's fine.
We often get a lot of, and then we will circle back. And I would love to have you back on the show again. This has just been absolutely delightful. I've learned a lot.
Thank you.
I hope that our audience has and will, as they watch this, gain valuable insights for themselves. Not that my words certainly are wise, but that in the dialogue,
Mm-hmm.
in the
Yes.
dialogue and in the
Yes.
listening, thoughts are triggered, insights are given, especially when we talk about things spiritual that have meaning.
And readers bring things to the page. So yeah.
So one last question before we go. Are you working on a book now?
I just finished one, and I am working on the next one. So the New Earth series, there's New Earth Justine, which was in that trailer, and then there's New Earth Hero, and then I did New Earth Progeny, and that's centered, and because I got into an argument with my brother about these artificial wombs, and that set off a real titanic struggle in me, because I think the bonding that goes on between mother and child in the womb is irreplaceable, and we would do the human race an incredible disservice if we ever broke that bond or tried to replace it with something else and called it good. So it delves into some of that. And what are we doing to women, and what are we doing to children? What are we doing to our bond as human beings to each other to become like this? We need these bonds. We need them more than ever. So yeah, I'm working on it, and I'm trying to move forward.
You've given me a tiny bit of insight in a new way into one of my favorite verses. I'm just going to read this real quick, the start of it. For me, Psalm 1 and Psalm 2 are all of human history wrapped up in two Psalms. The first one describes those who meditate on God's law, those who seek his help, his guidance. They are like trees planted by the riverside, and they have blessings, manifold blessings, not material blessings, sure, but blessings of the spirit, blessings of the soul. Psalm 2 is the opposite, and I'll just read the first couple of sentences here. Why do the heathen rage, which another word for nations? Why do the nations rage, and the peoples imagine a vain thing? The kings of the earth set themselves, and the rulers take counsel together against the eternal, against the Lord, and against his anointed, his messengers, including Jesus, Moses, the prophets, against his anointed, saying, let us break their bands asunder and cast away their cords from us. He that sits in the heavens shall laugh. The Lord shall have them in derision. Then shall he speak unto them in his wrath and vex them in his sore displeasure. I've often thought about what those bands are, the cords. What is it that people are casting off? What exactly are the bands that they perceive that God has put upon them and wrapped around them, the constraints?
Mm-hmm.
And when you mentioned the bond
Mm-hmm.
that is being destroyed by the idea that, well, we can just create our own wombs. It's that is what it is. Let us change the nature of everything. Let us set ourselves up as God. Because this is where discernment, I mean, I love creativity, and I love that you're writing science fiction and talking about angels and everything, or aliens rather. Because of that creativity and that discernment filtered through a sensibility of awe and submission to the will of God per Psalm 1. But the same kinds of tools, the same kinds of gifts that we have can be used to serve and worship our Creator, or to be casting his bonds asunder.
Mm-hmm.
It's that simple. The dividing line is so simple, but we get way out.
Either God, it's the first commandment: love the Lord thy God with all your mind and all your heart and all your soul. When we stop doing that, some bad things happen.
Yeah. Which is not to judge the good intentions and the good works that people are doing for altruistic reasons.
No, because the attribute of godly behavior,
right,
is an attribute of godly behavior, even if you don't call it that or don't even recognize
Amen. And which is why Paul said, they are a law unto themselves. When he said, when the Gentiles do that which by nature God has ordained, they are fulfilling the law that they don't even know about.
They don't
in the same
recognize
sense.
that, yes.
Right.
And maybe for good reasons, but that's a whole nother discussion.
Which is why none of us can judge another man's servant.
Mm-hmm. Very much.
Well,
it's been interesting. Thank you so much for inviting me.
I can't wait to follow up and have you back. We'll be looking at the comments in the chat, and if we can't find someone, we'll have you back and we'll give away 2 of your books next time, and we'll make sure we have a bigger audience. Well, Anne, thank you so much. With that, any last words or last comments before we wrap up?
God bless you, and have a wonderful Christmas season. And I don't know what 2024 is going to do, but God be with you in all of it.
Amen, and same to you. And I'll be thinking about John, and I'm really actually so glad that he, even though he didn't get to go to that last mass, he got to watch the movie.
Mm-hmm. I'm sure he was there more than even I knew. So yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks, Anne.
God bless.
Bye now.